Fine, thank you. Good morning there.
Thank you. So team, it's
So,
11 p.m. for Ricardo. Ricardo, thank you very much for taking this time to chat with us. When you are in California and we are in East Africa, the 10 hours of time difference is not making our job easy. But we really appreciate you being with us. As you know, we are going through the finals of A2SV Hackathon 2024. And we have finalists this year from 7 countries. So we have Ethiopia, South Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, Ghana, and Nigeria and Tanzania represented in our finals. Unfortunately, we couldn't bring our Nigerian members to Ethiopia due to some visa issues, but they are being part of the event remotely. So even if it's 6 a.m. for them, I see Oluwasegun, so hype. So some of our Kenyan members, Nigerian members are also with us at the moment. So without further ado, Vanessa, are we ready at the moment to start, or do you need a few more minutes?
so this will be completely online, or there is a room where they are listening to me?
So Ricardo, only Nigerian members are remote at the moment, and all the other members are currently in Addis Ababa. So over the weekend, we had the expo, and we actually see it, Ricardo. You were able to share your screen, but it's not in the presentation mode, right?
Okay, yeah, but that's why I'm saying I tried to put presentation mode and I cannot do it. So let me try share the whole screen now.
Sure.
I was sharing a window before. Let me see if sharing the whole screen. You see, it's like no, it's weird. Let me 1 second. Yeah, I know what I will do.
Sure. In the meantime, Ricardo, I can provide some background information about you and how we met. So, team, years ago, in 2009, 10, and 11, I did research internships at Yahoo Research Barcelona. And Ricardo was leading the lab. So that was our first touch. And in time, our paths crossed in California. So he was the CTO of Antent. And I interviewed with the company. And Ricardo was a very kind person. He is already extremely smart. He published so many scientific publications, like very well-known researcher in the field of information retrieval and AI. So Mother Information Retrieval book, still one of the best, if not the best. And I don't know in how many different countries, how many different universities it has been taught, written by Ricardo. So I feel very privileged and lucky to know him because on top of all these amazing academic and industrial success, he also has such a kind heart. So he was also one of our jury members last year at the A2SV Hackathon. And I can definitely tell that without your support, Ricardo, there is no way we could have gone this way.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Thanks for supporting young tech innovators in Africa and all over the world.
Thank you, Emre. Do you see the full screen now or not?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great.
So in that case, Ricardo, without further ado, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. So, and you hear me well, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Thank you. So I will give a shorter version of my keynote of ACM SIGMOD here. So ACM SIGMOD is the main conference in databases. And this is about the limitations of data, machine learning, and us. So I work in the Institute for Experiential AI. So are you seeing the next slide? Are you seeing the second slide?
Yes, Ricardo. Institute of Experiential AI, right?
Yeah, I want to
Yes,
say
yes.
because I cannot see the rest, so I cannot see you right now, but I wanted to make sure that you are seeing the right slide. So basically, in the institute, we want to basically have humans in control instead of humans in the loop or humans in charge. And also, we want to have practical solutions that also are responsible working solutions. And this is basically based on human oversight and more data, better algorithms. And we have a responsible AI practice where we help companies to achieve these goals. So we do applied research. Now, before I start, I would like to use an interesting quote for a very famous biologist, Edward Wilson. He was one of the first that pushed biodiversity at the end of last century. And for example, his latest book is about creativity. This was before generative AI, so not sure how much will change this book with the new technology. But he says, we have got paleolithical emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies. And why it's important? Because political emotions are our biases. That's our main limitation. Medieval institutions is our data. That's why data is never what we want, and it's always incomplete. And godlike technologies, which shows our medieval institutions, because we say God, so we are thinking of religions. Maybe I would say magic-like technologies is machine learning. Another important quote from Wittgenstein, one of the most famous philosophers of the 20th century, he said, the limits of my language means the limits of my world. And I really believe that. Basically, if you cannot express or communicate something, it's not part of your world. And today, many people don't read enough or don't travel enough to basically make their world wider. So I will start explaining some irresponsible AI issues, for example, discrimination, pseudoscience, unfair e-commerce. I will not have time to speak about that. Waste of resources, and sometimes pure human incompetence. Now, with generative AI, we have more disinformation than before, maybe multiplied by 100 times because it's much easier to do fake news. We have a new problem, copyright issues, and we have more cases of an old problem that now becomes more important, mental health. So if you see the incident database to the AI, which is the best database of curated incidents of AI, you will see that this grows kind of linearly. So it doesn't seem that it's a problem until 2023. But recently, this year, the OECD, using AI, started to monitor AI news, and they found out that these things have increased much faster after end of 2022, where generative AI started. So now we are not talking about one problem per week. We are talking about 2-3 problems per day. And maybe we're just seeing the top of the iceberg, which is an ice cube, very small ice cube on top of the iceberg. This is what we are seeing. You see that USA has most of the cases, UK and China next, India, Canada, and Australia follow. Now, this is what I would like to know in the future. This is unknown. This is what we need to find in research. So let's say you have the risk here from 0 to 1, the probability of something happening, and then you have the different problems, how many people affect. I have here 5 billions. If someone is wondering why it's not 8 billions, we go because 5 billions is the people that you can access to internet. So most of these problems only affect people that have access to internet. Now, AGI, I'm a skeptic. Even if we can do AGI, something else will happen before that. And then that's why it has probability almost 0. But of course, if AGI happens, this may affect all the population types. And all these values are just my perception. I don't know where they are. But of course, incompetence always happens. In incompetence, that's why it has probability 1. and human incompetence can affect all the people connected to internet. So what are the limitations? From data the data is a proxy of the world. It's not the reality. Typically, it's small, so that's also a problem if you want to use deep learning. Typically, it has bias, and of course, it always has quality issues. Also, we have privacy problems, both on the algorithmic side and the data side, and of course, that affects people. Then we have fairness issues, more bias created by algorithms, wrong evaluation. I will focus on this because this is one of the problems today. And then we are doing e-hacking, not ethical hacking, but evaluation hacking, and more bias basically coming from the interaction between the algorithms and the people. And in the people, we have cognitive biases, we have pseudoscience, we have unethical applications, we have social environmental issues, and we have, again, pure incompetence. So this is what I was trying to explain very fast in half an hour. So data limitations, I'm sorry I have a flu, are all these problems. I will not read this. I can send a copy of the presentation later, but I will like to only focus on the last one. My Murphy's law of data. The data that you have is not the data that you need. So always you need to think ahead. What is the right data before you collect it? Because otherwise, maybe you will collect the wrong data. And as I said, data is a proxy of reality. Therefore, machine learning does not work all the time. So we need to avoid datification. Data only partially represents the reality. And most problems have small data. If we have data size here, big data, only some companies have big data. Most companies have small data. And this is the problem today, that we are focusing on big data instead of focusing on small data, which are the realistic problems that we need to focus on. So I will not read this. There's a book called Small Data by Martin Lipscomb that is already like 7 years old. But I wrote something in KD Nuggets in 2018. And finally, Andrew Eng, which is much more well known, did something similar on February 2022, when he said, unvegan AI. So we need to look at small data, not only at big data. And then the first problem is the curse of bias. You have biased data that goes to an algorithm. All data has bias. Information has bias. Random noise doesn't help. So one important question is, should the algorithm do something about this bias? Should be neutral, should be fair. Now, bias can be positive. So one bias that we have is that we think that bias is negative. No, bias can be positive, neutral, or negative. In the following, I will only focus on the negative cases of bias. Well, most algorithms don't do this question, and then you get the same bias, and worse, sometimes you get amplified bias. But bias is not only in the data, and this is what I show in my communication LCM paper of 2018, that is now my most downloaded paper, and I will show you an example of bias amplification. But remember, bias may come from the algorithm, and bias may come from the interaction between people and the system, so the user feedback loop. So this was a problem that was requested by the US National Bureau of Economic Research. They wanted to spend less money in prisons, and was about 750,000 cases of bails in the state of New York. And if the predictions were right, this system was able to decrease the crime rate in 25%, keeping the same number of people in prison, or decrease the prison rate in 42%, keeping the same crime rate. Worse, if the system was correct, of the 1% most dangerous criminals, 49% were free, and the majority of them didn't go back to court and be offended. But what is interesting of this problem is that this amplified the bias. So let me show you the results. So the demography of people in the New York State is 18% Black, 13% Hispanic, so 32%, about one-third, are these two minorities. Well, the people that get to court is 49% Black, 37% Hispanic, 82% from these minorities. So here you see the systemic bias. Most people are minorities that come into court. Well, the judges are racist. They increase the number of Black people to 57%, decrease a little bit the Hispanic, like me, and then you get 89% minorities. So almost 3 times the original distribution. Well, the best model that only uses age, although there's a problem because age may be correlated with your ethnic origin, and use gradient boosted decision trees, so some kind of non-linear decision trees, from the data of the case, was able to capture this bias and increase the percentage of Black to 60%, decrease a little bit the Hispanic percentage, but overall, the minorities increased to 90%. So this model amplified the bias. Now, the good thing about models is that we can tune them, and for example, matching the lower rates, we have like 49% Black, 32% Hispanic. We mitigate a little bit the bias that arrives to the court, 80%, and then still we get a 23% improvement on the crime rate. So here I pose a question. What is better, a bias algorithm that is just in the sense that similar cases you get the same output, or a noisy judge that not always decides the same? Now, this is a fallacy question because judges are also biased. So these are algorithms. Algorithms have bias, but they don't have noise. People have bias and also have noise. So algorithms are C, people is D. So maybe in some cases, C may be better. However, is the problem? Here we're assuming that the data represents the problem, and in justice, data is a very bad proxy of the problem. I was using a paper from Daniel Kahneman and co-authors from 2016, but now we have a book that appeared 2 years ago, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago, on noise. So sometimes noise is worse than bias. And you know, sadly, Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize of Economy, died early this year. And then we have the worst case of discrimination, the CIDI, System for Risk Indication. It happened in Netherlands. Basically, some engineer had the bright idea of checking for fraud in childcare benefits, and that's the first problem. If you want to check for fraud, start with rich people, not with poor people. This is not ethical. And this system accused wrongly 26,000 families of cheating and asked money to return money, a lot of money. So some people had to go back to their countries of origin. Some people lost their employment and so on. This was almost targeted to immigrants because 32% of them were immigrants. After the Data Protection Agency of Netherlands said, don't do it, but the tax office with other ministers do it anyway, 5 years later, 4 NGOs sue the government. This becomes public in 2019, and a secretary resigns. And then finally, in 2020, a court said that this is illegal. They have to basically compensate the people. So some people were too late. And after several reports, including one from the Dutch parliament, they see that the system maybe affected more than 100,000 people. So this is the worst case of discrimination in the world. And in January 14, 2021, the chief of the opposition resigns. Why? He was part of the government when this started, and he was the Ministry of Social Affairs that, without knowing, they started this easy, but he didn't know that. So sometimes people do things without asking if they can do that or not. One day later, the whole government of Netherlands resigned. So this problem made a whole government to resign January 15, 2021. But there are limitations. As I said, data models are proxies. All models are wrong, but some are useful. This is a famous saying of a statistician in 1976. Let me give you an example. This is uh, when Elon Musk said, use Signal. He was referring to the chat app, which is the most private one, where some stock option system that uses data from influencers, so that he was talking about Signal Advance Inc. Started to buy a stock. This company grew its price in 438%, and the company was happy, but all the people that followed the trend was very unhappy because they lost money, because it was nothing to do with this company. Or for example, what they learn, like example, Experiential AI. You change one bit and a cat becomes a bird, a cat becomes a dog, or a dog becomes a cat with very high confidence. So it's difficult to understand what they're learning. It's much harder to forget, to filter what you learn. Also, you cannot learn what's not in data. That data does not capture everything. So this is what probably happened when an Uber self-driving car killed a woman in 2018 in Arizona, because they didn't recognize her. Maybe there was not enough data about women crossing in a bicycle at night in a road in the wrong place. So most data in many problems is in the future. That's why after this, Uber sold their self-driving car unit. Or maybe we are doing things that we shouldn't do, wrong comparisons. Like, for example, Geoff Hinton, recent Nobel Prize, said in 2020, should we make illegal a robot that has 90% accuracy and is better than a human surgeon with 80% accuracy? Well, I don't know why he was asking this in Twitter, but this question is another misleading question. Why? Because it depends on the case. You cannot generalize. You cannot average things like human life. So for example, if we have diversity in one axis and complexity on the other axis, I will use the medical robot for a typical case. But if I'm outside the typical cases that I know that will be in the training data, I want to use a human doctor that will extrapolate if something goes wrong. I try to put here, and you can find me my essay in Medium. You can find here what really happens. And maybe I'm being too nice, but the red lines should drop much faster, because anything here is not in the training data. So this should be more like a collapse here, and the human doctor is much better. The human doctor also gets worse, but doesn't collapse because of complexity. And why this question is wrong? Because the best solution is to work together. Why I need to choose? Put both together, and we have the best of both worlds. And maybe the accuracy will be 95% in that case, much better. Or we do unfair comparisons. So this is a typical graph that you will find in a machine learning paper. You have some quality metric like accuracy, you have data size, and then you compare two models, and you say A1 is better than A2. Wrong. You are not being fair, because you need to know how much time you have, how many resources you can use. And if you have limited resources, maybe the answer is different. Let's say I have a certain complexity in time. I can use T star time. Well, maybe A1 gets only to here, but A2 gets to here. Why? Because A2 is faster and can process more data, and that's why the quality is not so good, but for the same time, the quality is better than A1, thanks to more data. And the final problem is that we are evaluating success. Imagine you go to a pharmacy and you ask, what are the pros and cons of this drug? And the person says, oh, it works 90% of the time. And then you ask, well, what happens when it doesn't work? Oh, we don't know. No one has done any experiment of that. Imagine if food were like that. We would be all dead. Well, we are doing this today with AI. We don't care about what happens when it doesn't fail, when it fails. And that's very important because all errors don't have the same impact. So if we don't analyze the 10% of errors, you're assuming that they all have the same impact. And they are non-human errors. For example, the first person that died with a Tesla was this guy that was using the autopilot, and basically the autopilot did distinguish a white trailer on front of the cloudy sky, something that all of you, even drunk, will recognize. That's why it's called non-human errors. Humans don't make these errors. Well, this is the graph of Waymo and Cruise incidents in San Francisco. I don't know why the person put the newest date on the left. This is an example of about the graph. But the red stopped here because basically they had one major problem and they hide the video of the problem. Which were the first problems? You put a cone in the hood and the car will stop. Couldn't recognize that the cone was in the hood and not in the ground. Or they were blocking emergency vehicles, probably this here. They didn't know what to do when an ambulance was coming. And the worst, a car went over a woman, stopped, and instead of stay there and letting the woman get out, the car decided to park, dragging the woman below. Luckily, the woman didn't die, but she had to go to the hospital. But something that you will never do, you never go and drag a person below your car unless you want to harm that person. So these are the non-human errors. Is when a person will never do the error and event predictions do. So these red parts are not the non-human errors. And I have a paper with one of my PhD students, 2022, about this. So let me give you an example. This is a classifier of cats and dogs. People is very bad to know the type of dog or type of cat. So this classifier is much better than any person, and unless you are an expert. 93% accuracy, 7% of errors. But what will be a non-human error? And this has these errors. A non-human errors will be is confusing a dog with a cat or a cat with a dog. And they are four like this. So this point here is this Chihuahua, that the system thinks an Abyssinian cat or a Sphinx cat, and only the third prediction is a Chihuahua. And you can see clearly that this is a dog, it's not a cat, but the system can recognize that. This is a non-human error. If you confuse a dog for a cat, this could be dangerous. And then we get to e-hacking, evaluation hacking, not ethics, not choosing the best data, choosing an easy benchmark, choosing the wrong metrics, choosing weak baselines, and then choosing the result that match your hypothesis. I have seen papers with all that. And no comments about p-hacking, statistical hacking, and not giving enough details to make the problem, the work reproducible. But this may be unintended. For example, there was a very interesting paper that won the Outstanding Paper Award last year in NIPS, is basically showing that these emergent properties are not mirages. If you do nonlinear scores, if you do continuous scores, then something that looks like emergent property becomes something soft, and clearly you see that there are no emergent abilities. So sometimes choosing the wrong metric and basically using discrete measures is not good. And sometimes we have pure human incompetence. For example, this was an engineer in Facebook that decided to use an English train model in France and decided that the town of Beach was forbidden. This was a hate language model. Of course, this kind of funny, but if they were using this for COVID announcements, it's not funny any longer. This was in 2021, April, when there were still COVID almost everywhere. And then we have our own cognitive biases. So basically, personal bias transfer to code, creating categories that don't exist. For example, we are doing that in the EU proposal because we have high and low risk systems. But where is the boundary between high and low? It's very hard. We don't know even how to measure risk, how we will create these categories. So these categories of how low and marginal risk are non-existent. So we are using categories that don't exist. We have another problem, conceptual problem. Should we regulate the use of technology? I don't think so. Regulation should be technology independent, but we are doing this for the first time. And finally, we have an AI loophole because if I say that I don't use AI, we don't need to use the regulation. So basically, I can claim that I'm using sophisticated statistics and I don't use AI. And this may happen. In January this year, finally, all people in the UK knew about the Horizon scandal with the post office, an accounting software that accused 900 people of cheating, and only Alan Bates, where Toby Jones was the actor, went to the system, and finally they proved that they were innocent because the problem was corrupt data. But 4 people committed suicide, many people lost their home, some people went to prison. This is a worst UK justice scandal. And then we have pseudoscience. For example, I watch to your face and I say, what is your sexual orientation? Or I look at Emre and I can predict if he will commit a crime tomorrow, like Minority Report. This is non-ethical. This is not science. In 2020, they tried to do it again in the US. This paper was almost published in one of the Nature journals until only one person said this is not ethical and this is not science. You cannot infer criminality from your face. And then Kosinski, the same one of sexual orientation, came back to basically predict political orientation. In the US, it is easy. You have 2 parties. So maybe if I have a beard or long hair, I'm a Democrat. But if you have 10 parties, this is nonsense. You cannot do this. These are just spurious correlations. So this is like modern phrenology. It's something that started at the end of the 18th century in Germany that claimed that criminals had different convolutions on the brain. Well, Cesare Lombroso, an Italian doctor in Torino in the 19th century, decided to simplify this hypothesis. He said that the skulls of the criminal are different. So he collected hundreds of skulls looking for this difference. Of course, he didn't find any, but he really believed this because he left his skeleton to show the ground truth. This is the skeleton of a normal person that collected hundreds of scars in his life. But can be worse. You give me your name and send me a message, and with that, I can infer your face, thanks to a patent that was given to Mitre, and thanks to a paper that was published by MIT and CVPR, one of the main computer vision conference. So this is my master pseudoscience algorithm to know if you are a political opposer, if you have a illegal sexual orientation, or if you will commit a crime. But then we are doing something worse. We are averaging people. For example, they tried to do this in 2020, but they couldn't use it because they learned something we all know. Private schools get better scores than public schools. But this is on average. There are bad students and good students in every school, private or public. So here I have a very important question that there's no paper that shows this. Why data from other people can be used to predict your behavior? If you go first time to a bank, maybe they will tell you, no, I cannot give you a loan. Why? Because you are too young. But you may be the best customer. There is no scientific paper that shows that data from other people can predict your behavior. So if you are doing that for credit scoring, for hiring people, for doing justice, you are doing pseudoscience. And finally, one slide about sustainability. This is the work of Timi Gebru, Ethiopian researcher that was laid off from Google. But they show that, for example, to train a very simple transformer, only 200 million parameters, this was equivalent of 57 years of the carbon footprint of an average human life. And now it's worse, because it's not only that we use millions of dollars of electricity, the real problem, which could be 2% of the energy of the world today, which is a lot, is that billions of people using the model every day is a lot of resources. And maybe for ChatGPT, you are doing something useful, but I don't know why people is not looking at TikTok or Instagram, wasting their time. Just to, ChatGPT is 10 times the cost of a search. So don't use ChatGPT for search. One, because it's too expensive resources. And second, because ChatGPT will predict everything. It's not relevant results, it's predicted results. And if more specific the search, more probably this prediction will be wrong. So to end, I want to give you a real ethical dilemma. Maybe you know the trolley problem, that you need to change the direction of the trolley so you avoid killing 5 people, and only you kill 1 people, but the difference is that you decided that, so you killed the person. Before you were not involved. Well, you can forget this question. You will never have this question in real life. But we have another problem today. Let's say these are all the people killed by cars, including conductors, drivers. You don't need to convince me that self-driving cars will kill less people. That's for sure. They don't drink alcohol, they don't look at the cell phone, they don't smoke, they don't get sleepy. No problem. What is the real problem? The real problem is that they will kill less people, but they will kill some people that before was not in danger of being killed. So this is the problem. We save a lot of irresponsible men driving with the autopilots, like if you see all the accidents of Tesla, or you kill some women, some kids that were not in danger of being killed. I don't have the answer. This is not easy. And to end and to see that's not easy, you will see 3 famous people. Voltaire said, better to have a guilty person free than to go to send innocent one to the prison. A few years later, Blackstone, a famous judge in the UK, said that it's not 1 person, it's 10. Better to have 10 guilty persons escape than 1 innocent suffer. And this is the famous Blackstone rule. Well, 20 years later, Franklin, one of the fathers of the US independence, said, it's not 10, it's 100. And if you read the quote, you cannot argue with him because he knows that he's right. So what is this, 1, 10, or 100? This is like a earthquake logarithmic scale.
Hidden bias that.
So no, I'm saying that you want a bias that people really don't know, not because the most common is gender bias, but you are talking about one that we don't see, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, in general, people don't know, but scientists have more understanding, let's say.
Yes, okay. So the most common bias is gender bias. For example, in documents, we have seen that 80% of the documents have gender bias, but there are, for me, the most important case